Hi guys, in this video we're going to talk about if statements. If statements are very straightforward. They allow you to test a condition to see if it's true or false. And depending on if it's true, they allow you to execute some code, and if it's false, they allow you to execute some different code. That's basically what an if statement is. So let's let's write some code first that uses some data. So let's say we have some data, and this is related to people's tax bracket. So how much you pay in taxes every year. Let's say it's determined by how much money you make a year. So here's the salary of people, and we have 5 people here, and here's their salaries. And then their taxes are also determined by whether they have kids or not. And what we want to do is first write a if statement in a function. So we're going to write this function get tax rate. So let's go write this function. I go to this if statement module that we already built, and what I'm going to do is put option explicit up here, and now I can do function like we've seen before, get tax rate. And this function is going to have a parameter which is just going to be the salary, and that parameter is going to be of data type double, and it's going to return a double because I'm going to return the tax rate here. So there's my structure of my function. And now I want to write an if statement based on I want to test the condition if this salary is greater than a number, and if it is, I'm going to determine a tax rate. So let's write an if statement. To write an if statement, you write the word if, which is a keyword, and then you write a condition. So our condition is if the salary is greater than 5,000, then we want to do something. And notice I actually wrote the word then. So if the salary is greater than 5,000, then I want my function get tax rate to return 25%. And then I'm going to end this if statement with the keyword end if. So that's an if statement, and it's very straightforward. You have a couple keywords in here. The if is a keyword, the then is a keyword, and the end if is a keyword. And you need those 100% of the time when you write an if statement. And they just provide the structure for the if statement. The main point is, though, what I'm highlighting here is a condition, and the if statement is going to check this condition. So if the salary is greater than 5,000, if that's true, then I'm going to execute this code here, and all I'm going to do is return 25% to the name of my function, and that'll return 25% to the worksheet. Remember with functions, if you forgot, that to return a value from a function, you need to assign a value. So here's my value. You need to assign it to the name of the function. So let's test this out, and let's go to Excel, and let's test this get tax rate function. So I'm just going to do equals get tax rate. And there's the function that we just wrote. Now I could pass in a salary. So I'm going to pass in 3,000. And what's going to happen is if I hit enter, I get 0. And let me just copy this down. And notice the other one showed 25%. So what we can do is put a breakpoint real quick just to show you how the if statement is being run. I'll put a breakpoint there on the if line. And when I go into this cell and I hit enter, notice that I'm passing in 3,000 in cell B3 here. Here's B3. That value is 3,000. If I hit enter, it'll go to the function and it'll stop on that line where I put the breakpoint. And if I just do the locals window here. So here's my locals window. You could see that salary is equal to 3,000. So the if statement, all an if statement does is check a condition. Our condition again is salary greater than 500. In this case, salary is 3,000. So what's it going to do? It's going to, if I step into this, it just jumped to the next. It jumped to the end if line. it didn't even go into this area. The when you step into the code, it just stepped over this because this returned false. And that's how an if statement works. It evaluates this condition, and if it's true, then you're going to execute this code. If it's not true, it's just going to jump over this stuff and go to the next area of code. In this case, the next area of code is the end if. So that is an if statement in a very simple example. So then if I hit run, you can see now that I get a tax rate of 25% for all the salaries that are over 5,000. If I change this to 4,999, I get 0. If I even do 4,909.99999, I still get 0. Up here, I still get 0. This is just not showing enough decimals. If I increase this, you can see that this is just a formatting issue. The real value is 4,090. There it is, the real value. That's what I have in there. That's why I have 0, because it's less than 5,000. And if I put 5,001 in here, then I'm going to get 25%. So that's an if statement. Now, how can you make this better? Well, let's say I want to do more conditions because I want to be able to test if it's less than 5,000 or greater than 5,000. Then I want to use this structure here. So here's a structure we just used. It's the simplest structure. It's just if, and then you check a condition. In our case, we checked one condition. That's why I have condition 1 here. And then I have the keyword then, and I have code here. I put some code. If your condition 1 is true, then you write some code here. Let's say we have 2 conditions. We want to not 2 conditions, but we want to check. We want to do something if condition 1 is false. So that's when we would use this else statement. Here's the else statement, or the else keyword. This is the else keyword, and you can notice it's not much different than the original structure. You just, after the code we write, we just put the word else, and then you put some other code that will evaluate if condition 1 is false. So let's go into our code here and write another function that looks exactly like our first function, only I'm just going to change the name to else. And now what happens if this condition is false? Well, I want to write some code for that. So what I'm going to do is hit enter here and put the word else. And now I could write get tax rate is equal to 10%. And this sort of makes sense. If you make more money, if your salary is greater than 5,000, then I'm going to charge you more. I'm going to charge you 25% taxes. If you make less money, I'm going to charge you less. That's how, in America, the tax rate is set up. Well, not exactly those numbers, but the simplistic framework. So now I could go in here and I could do get tax rate else. Again, I'm going to pass in a salary. And if I hit enter, oops. Oh, I get an error. I'm sorry. I was moving too fast. I didn't rename this. I should have done that. Very good, error. So you guys can see you really need to assign a value to the name of the function. And that's why I got that error, because I was assigning a value, but the name of my function is this, and I didn't have that same name here. But now I do. So I could go back to the worksheet, and if I just hit enter here, I get a value of 10%. Why is it 10%? It's because the salary is less than 5,000, so that's why I get 10%, and everything else here is 25%. If I just make $1, I'm going to get 10% again because I'm less than 5,000. And again, here's our code. If your salary is greater than 5,000, then I'm going to charge you 25%. Else, I'm going to charge you 10%. Okay, so now notice what we've done. We've written 2 functions that both of them use if statements, and both of them use these things. Remember what these things are? These are the relational operators that define a relation between 2 things. Well, we also learned previously about logical operators like and, or not, so we can use those in the conditions that we're testing. And that's what we'll do now. I'm going to just change the name of this function to and immediately I'll go down here and change this to and so that I don't get that same error. And now all I want to do is say if the salary is greater than 5,000 and the salary is less than 40,000, then I'm going to assign 25%. If it's not in this range, I'm going to assign it 10%. So if it's greater than 40,000 or if it's less than 5,000, then you're going to get 10%. So let's see what this looks like now. All I did was take this same function and added this bit of code here. And I did this to show you the logical operators and what they do. Remember that the AND logical operator, it tests two expressions and it returns true or false. So this was the AND logical operator. It returns true if both expressions are true and false if both expressions are false. So here, this is the entire condition. No longer do I have just my condition 1. It consists of two expressions. Here's my first expression and here's my second expression. And for this whole condition to be true, both of these expressions need to be true. If they're false, if one of them's false, then it's going to fall into this false statement here. So let's test this real quick. And if we go here and we do equals get tax rate and let's say we make 3,000 a year. Let's see what happens to our code. Okay, so now again, here's our code. Our salary in the locals window, in memory, that variable has the value 3,000. So salary is 3,000. Now let's evaluate this entire condition. It has two expressions. The first expression is the salary greater than 3,000? Well, that's no, right? Because the salary is greater than 5,000. That, if this evaluates to no right here, it evaluates to false because 3,000 is not greater than 5,000. So immediately this condition, because both of these things have to be true to return true, this condition that I highlighted is going to return false. That means I'm going to jump down to this code here. So let's step into it and see if that actually happens. And sure enough, I step into it and I jump to this else keyword, and that means this did not get evaluated. And so I am actually going to go to this code here. So the tax rate is going to be 10%. And now if I run it, we can go to the worksheet and we could see, there's a tax rate of 10%. And if I drag this down, the only salary that gets a 25% is the 35,000, and that's because that's the only salary between 5,000 and 40,000. That's greater than 5,000 and less than 40,000. And we were able to write this function with using the AND logical operator. If I change this to 7,000, then I'm going to get 25% because this also falls between 5,000 and 40,000. So you're able to do very dynamic stuff here. You can test if something is true and you could do something. You can test if it's true and you could do the same thing, and then if it's false you can do something else. You can add in logical operators to your code so that you can write multiple expressions. Like you could put another and here. You could do this many times. You could put 10, tens and tens of different logical operators. Most times you're not going to need that, but you can write a lot of other statements like and x greater than y and h greater than I. If you needed to, you could just keep writing more and more expressions and they'll evaluate. The if statement allows you to evaluate all that stuff. Or you could do an or statement. You could do that just as an example. So that's where you would use these logical operators. Okay. So now let's move on to another type of if statement that's called an else if statement. Notice here when you use this structure, the if and the else and the end if, you only get two possible areas to write code. This is one area where I could write code and this is another area. Well, what if you had many different possibilities and you want to write code for many different conditions? So we'll write a get tax rate and then we're going to call this else if. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it here again, so make sure we don't get that error to assign values to our name of the function. And then we're going to leave this the same. If the salary is greater than 5,000 and the salary is less than 40,000, then I'm going to assign a tax rate of 25%. But what I'm going to do now is test multiple other conditions. So to do that, you do something like this. Else if, this is a keyword, else if the salary, let me just copy this. If the salary is greater than or equal to 40,000 and the salary is less than 90,000, then I'm going to assign a tax rate of 35%. And then I could copy this again and I could write another else if statement that says if the salary is greater than or equal to 90,000 and then let's say I don't want to do another and, I just want to say anything over 90,000, you're going to get 45%. And then you end the else if statement with an else keyword, and this is simply going to say I want to assign 0. So think about this code and what's going on here. Now I have multiple conditions. Here's one condition, and if that's true, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get a tax rate of 25%. If that's false, then I'm going to evaluate this. And if this condition is true, then I'm going to get a tax rate of 35%. If that's false, then I'm going to evaluate this condition, and I'm going to get a tax rate of 45%. And if all of these are false, the top three, that condition's false, that condition's false, that condition's false, then I'm going to get a tax rate of 0. So the else if allows you to test multiple conditions and account for a lot of different scenarios. So if we run this now, let's put a breakpoint there and go over here and run this equals get tax rate else if. If I put a salary in there and I run this, hit enter. Again, our salary that we pass in here as a parameter is 3,000. So it's going to evaluate this condition. Is the salary greater than 5,000? And the answer to that is no. So this entire condition evaluates to false because the and only returns true if both of these are true, if both expressions are true. And this expression here is false. So it's going to go down here. It's going to go to this line. And if we hit step into, it certainly does. It skips over that code here and it goes down here. And then it's going to evaluate this code. It's going to say, is 3,000 greater than or equal to 40,000? And the answer to that is no. So again, this and statement here evaluates to false. So it's going to skip this line and it's going to go to this line if I hit this step into. There it goes. And now it's going to test this condition. Is 3,000 the salary greater than or equal to 90,000? And that's of course is false. So it's going to skip this line when I hit the step into and go to the final else statement. And there it goes to the else statement. And now it's not going to test anything. You notice there's no condition over here. It's just automatically going to execute this code. So if I step into, it executes that code, and if I hit run, let me take this breakpoint off. If I hit run, we get a value of 0 here. So we get a value of 0 for our salary of 3,000. If I bring this down, notice now we are getting, I'm just going to move this stuff over. We're getting different tax rates. So the 35,000 salary gets 25% because it's between 5,000 and 40,000. And so does this because it's between 5,000 and 40,000. This gets 45% because it's over 90,000, and this gets 35% because it is, let's check the code. It gets 35% because it's over 40 and it's less than 90. So that's what an else if statement is. It allows you to test multiple conditions. And in the worksheet, we've seen the basic structure here, and then we added an else statement here, and then the else if looks very similar, except here you still need an else statement, but above the else you can test other conditions. So here's 2 other conditions you can test. So you start with one condition. If you want to test multiple conditions, you can do that here and here, and then you still need the else at the very bottom, and then you could put end if. But in between, you write the code that is going to be executed if this condition is true, and that code could be anything. It could be very big, and in fact, it could be a nested if statement, what's called a nested if. So now let's go to our code here, and I want to write a nested if statement. So just to show you the complexity you can go to with these if statements, let's copy this, and there it's copied. And now we'll do tax rate nested if, and now I'm going to take 2 parameters into my code, into my function. The first one is a salary. The second one is going to be called has kids, and it's going to be a string parameter. So there I have the data type of the parameter as a string, and now what I want to do is within each area here, I want to put another if statement. So instead of doing something like this, I'm going to do something like this. Just to show you how complex you can get, you can do nested if statements. This is called a nested if statement because it's an if statement within an if statement. So now I'm going to write an if statement. If have kids is equal to yes, then my tax rate is going to be equal to 15%. Else, my tax rate is going to be equal to 25%. And let me just copy this name of this. So this here, and indentation is key here when you're writing these nested if statements. Notice here's my if statement, my main if statement, which goes along with my else ifs, right? And before we just returned a value to the function. Now we have an entire if statement. This is another if statement that's nested within this if statement. So here's our main if statement, and this is a nested if statement. So I'm going to just write that, this is a nested if. And we're going to do that again over here. that if the salary is greater than 40,000 and the salary is less than 90, I want to have another if statement here. I'll put a tab, and then I'll do if has kids is yes. Then I'm going to do 28% and 35%. And then if the salary is greater than 90,000, I'm going to do another nested if. So I'm going to eliminate just a single line. And if it's greater than 90,000, now if you make more than $90,000 and you have kids, I'm going to tax you at 42%. And if you don't have kids, I'm going to tax you at 45%. And finally, I'm just going to leave the else here. Well, let's do, well, we don't, well, yeah, let's leave it here. But you could put another if statement down here. I guess we could. So let's do it. All right, so I'll put another if statement underneath the else. And if you have kids, that's the only people that I'm going to charge nothing. If you don't have kids, then I'm going to charge just 1%. But remember, this is going to be executed when you make less than 5,000, right? That's the only time you're going to fall into the else statement. It's when you make less than 5,000. So now let's put a break here. And just so we can see how this code works, let's go here to the worksheet and let's do this if statement, get tax rate nested if. Now what happens when I pass in 3,000 as my salary? I also need to pass in has kids, a value for the has kids parameter. So now when I hit enter, look what happens. In the locals window, the salary variable has 3,000 in it, and the has kids has the word yes in it. So now when we step through, we already sort of know what's going to happen because we saw pretty much what happened before is that the first if statement, meaning the main one, the outer one, is going to do exactly what we did over here, right? It's just going to, the first if statement tests the salary, and we did that up here. We put a nested if that tests the kids, within each area to write code. So we started testing, does the has kids parameter, is it yes or no? We tested that here. So we know what this is going to do. If you make $3,000, you're going to go all the way down to this code here, the else. And once you get to the else, now you can execute this other if statement, this nested if statement. Let me just scroll up a little bit. So now we get to the else like we just did in the previous function. And now though we're testing an entirely different and unique if statement. So now we're testing has kids. So here has kids is set to yes, and if it is yes, if that evaluates to true, which it does, notice it's true because has kids down here is yes. So yes is equal to yes, that evaluates to true. That means you're going to get a tax rate. Oops. I think the spelling is wrong here. So what you can do, this is a good test. This should have evaluated to yes or true. So I spelled it with a small y. Let me go up and change it to a big Y. And now I can just move this arrow. I can move that arrow back up a couple lines. And when I do that, it falls into where it should fall in. And that's because the capitalization counts. So here has kids has a capital Y. Before it had a small y, so it fell into here, and it shouldn't have. It should fall into there. So now it falls into there. Let me just go back up and change these to capitals. So this is a good example of making sure that the conditions, you're setting in your expressions, or the expressions you have, they have to match case-wise, uppercase, lowercase. So if you want to test if the word yes equals this word yes, make sure the capitalization is the same. And since it is here, big Y, capital Y is equal to capital Y yes is equal to capital Y yes, I get a tax rate of 0, which is correct. And then I go to the end if line, and then here's the end if line. So notice the nested if here is done, and now the nested if for the main function is done, and then I'm going to end function. One thing to note is that when you have a function, you only want to assign to it once. So notice this if structure allows us to do all this fancy stuff with these conditional statements, but I'm only assigning to this get tax rate nested if one time, which is whatever line it falls into. If it's here, I'm going to only get into this code once. I'm not going to get into here and then get into here. You don't want to be able to do that. So you have to write your code so you're only assigning to your function once. So then if I step through, go back to my worksheet, get tax rate nested if. I get a value of 0 here. And I get 0 because you make less than 5,000 and you have kids. If I do make kids, I want to eliminate this breakpoint. If you do have kids, I'm just going to hit enter, and now I get 0.1. So if you do have kids, your tax rate is 0.1. Or I'm sorry, if you don't have kids. If you do have kids, your tax rate is 0. And if I bring this down, you can see now I have a lot of different tax rates over here. 25, 15, 45, 28. And let's just look at one. So if you make over $90,000, let's go into that. Let's go look at that code. If you make over $90,000 here, then if you have kids, you're going to be taxed at 42%. If you don't, it's 45%. So if I go back to the worksheet, here this person makes over 90,000. They don't have kids, so they get 45%. If you do have kids, you get 42%. This person here makes 50,000. They get charged 28%. If you don't have kids and you make 50,000, you get 35%. So if statements allow you to test conditions. That's why if statements are called conditional statements. And your conditions are composed of expressions. So let me just clarify this. So here's your condition that you're testing, and your condition is composed of expressions, and here's your expression 1 and expression 2, and you can combine expressions with and, or you can combine expressions with or. Like we know what and or not do, and then you use the relational operators, and you can make very, very complex stuff like we just did. And then you can nest if statements within if statements, and you could even do it again. I mean, if you wanted to, you could write, instead of doing this, you could write another if statement here, and that'll get, if you could comment this out, and then you can write another if statement, if da 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 da, then and if, and then you will put some code here, or you could do an else. So you could keep nesting them, but it gets very complex. So you want to, not complex, you just have to know what's going on. So try to limit the amount of nesting you do, because it just makes your code a little bit more complex than a simple if statement. And the other thing you want to keep in mind is when you're writing if statements and you're writing nested ifs, keep your indentation properly. If everything was aligned all the way to this margin over here, to the left margin, you wouldn't be able to really understand what's going on. You want to keep your if statement aligned so that you can see, okay, here's an outer if statement, and then there's the else if that belongs to this if statement. And I should really, back that up a bit. And so you could see the structure of your code. Here's if, and then there's the else if, and then here's my if, and you could even put a tab here and a tab here, and okay, there's another if statement in here. And so you want your code to look good so that you can read it easily. So I can just make it a little bit more pretty by putting the indentations in like this. And I'm just pressing the tab button and things like that. And there you go. So now my code looks pretty. It looks pretty and easier to read. And I could do the same thing for the other code that I wrote, but I won't. The main idea is that you can test conditions and return values. Okay, so that is the video for if statements.